Warm round of applause for this next set of people who are coming in as part of the panelists on Global Indians. First is Abhinav Kumar, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Tata at TCS. Abhinav is located out of Brussels, Belgium. Thank you for coming in, Abhinav. Next up is Bodhi Thakur, Senior Vice President and Group Business Director at WPP. He's based in Detroit, US. Thank you, Bodhi. Next is Lavanya Wadgaonkar, Global Vice President for Communications at Nissan Motor Company. She's located out of Yokohama, Japan. Next is Sahana Prabhakar, Head of Communications for APAC and India at Alcon. She's based out of Singapore. And moderating the panel today is Heena, Kanal, Vice President and Head of Corporate Communications at Cipla.
Okay, today we are here to discuss something very important. I don't know how many of you make presentations, but you know, whenever we are Googling something to put on our presentations, we come across this quote from supposedly Bill Gates that said that if I were down to my last dollar, I would spend it on PR. And to that, I would say that please don't wait till you reach your last dollar. You know, PR has transformed in the last few years. We are the storytellers, the narrators, the reputation custodians, and we have seen that come alive in the last 2 years specifically. Yet, the lines are blurring. We understand there is no one owner for earned media, paid media, owned media. And does PR have what it takes to sit at the table? I have with me some great minds today from all across the globe, and I'll be able to hopefully give you a sense of whether PR is future-proof, future flourish, or much more than that. So without much ado, I'd like to put the first question to Lavanya. Lavanya, do we have a seat at the table?
Can you hear me? This is one thing we need to future-proof in the coming days. Yes, I think the debate is no longer about do we have seat at the table. The debate is about why we are sitting at the table. Because future-proofing is not about reinventing ourselves. Future-proofing is to stay relevant. And the more we look at how the world is changing, we have this necessity to stay authentic, and we have the necessity to be able to stay real. I always say that when you're at the table, you have multiple roles to play. Sometimes you are playing the role of an influencer, sometimes you're advocating something, but most of all, for me, communications is the conscience of the company, the conscience of the people. I think we have that very important role where we convince the executives to understand the outside perspective, not from objective point of view, but more from an emotional point of view. And then the past 3 years have really proved that, right? So we are, I would say, in a stage where we say we are still in transition, and this transition makes it difficult for us sometimes to really think whether it is past, because I hear these buzzwords about traditional PR versus modern PR, but what exactly is the definition of these? Because you are evolving on a daily basis today, so maybe what is this morning could become traditional by evening, so it's about staying on top of it and being relevant.
And like we were discussing, yesterday, that there were times when we used to create campaigns and brands for 5 years down the line, but today it's here and now. And in that sense, how can PR add value? Abhinav, would you like to?
Yeah, I would. But just to answer your previous question as well, do we have a seat on the table? I'll give you a view from Europe. So I moved to Europe about 14 years ago. I'm based in Belgium. And when you attended the praxises of Europe, gatherings such as this, At that point of time, 2008, the crisis had just gone by. And a lot of the discussion was around getting to that seat on the table for communications directors. A lot of them reported into legal, to human resources, many to the chief marketing officer. And that was considered the next strategic step. How do you get a seat on the executive committee? Fast forward 14 years, I think that's a battle that has been won, at least in Europe, quite significantly. If you look at any of the surveys which are done there, today about 80% of chief communications officers of European companies have a seat on their executive committees. And about the same number, 80 to 85% directly report into the CEO. So that battle has certainly been won. When it comes to future-proofing, I think while it's a great team and there's fantastic discussions happening here, my view is it's in a sense almost impossible to future-proof anything. You look at a car, you look at a building, you look at a company. Companies, right? Your clients, as agencies, are not future-proof. If you look at the average S&P 500 company, about 15, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, they used to have a longevity of about 60 years. A company would last 60 years. Today, an average company lasts only 15 years. There is a very rapid rate of decline of companies. You know, they shut down, they get disrupted, they get merged, and other things. Now, if you need to future-proof anything, I don't think there's an act or a set of things you can do which will future-proof something forever. To me, I mean, future-proofing is not an act, it is a continuous process. You have to keep doing it. And the best way of doing it is to, as an organization, I think there are two things if you need to do. It's to increase your talent density. If you have good talent in your company, they'll be able to direct you on the way forward, they'll be able to react to opportunities, they'll be able to create your next businesses and pivot. And the second thing is to have agility, which is you need to create safety inside your agencies and companies, that the people on the ground who see how fast things are moving are able to bring their ideas and thoughts without any fear or repercussions to the boardroom and to the executive committees. And if you can do that and constantly do that, that's the best way to future-proof your business. I mean, if you look at Blockbuster, had they stayed in touch with the consumer and at an early stage figured out that consumers started using this thing called Netflix, they had an option to buy Netflix at just $50 million at the early stage. They declined that. And obviously that turned out to be a historic mistake. So I think future-proofing is something you need to keep working at again, on and on and on.
So you made an interesting point about talent, and we'll come to that in a bit. But before that, I'd like to know what you think of what Abhinav just said. Like, do we have a seat at the table in the U.S. world where traditionally it's a marketing world, and they do marketing better than most other countries. So where does PR sit there?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thank you for coming for a session this morning after that long night. So we all appreciate you listening to us. So I think, I remember a quote when I was in India when Neha Dhupia said, only sex and SRK sells in Bollywood. I think in communications, I think it is the creative idea that sells. And in the US and in the UK, which I've seen, is that an idea comes from anywhere. And I think what Abhinav was trying to say, it's future-proofing the business. So I think we have to move beyond thinking like, oh, whether our job is intact, what should we do to give that idea to the communications client. It would be beyond that, like whether we are reaching the CEO and having our voices heard, because the idea is important and it's coming from anywhere. So, like, I'll give you an example. Like, we had a huge power outage in Texas last year, and there were people who were out of power for like weeks, and it's a huge problem. It's not something that advertising can solve overnight. So we have at Ford, which is our client, we have a truck that can power up your appliances. So we started sending those through dealers, and like the media picked up immediately as a grassroots story, and it became like a human cause story, which the CEO to the business and everybody rallied behind. So sometimes it's an idea that just comes and like cascades upward. You don't need to think of it like, but if somebody was thinking of like, let's wait for an approval, it would have never happened. So, and like Abhinav said, and you said, the timeliness and like the fact that we are in a world where social is moving faster than we imagined. We have COVID. We have been doing, communications has done everything, and during this period that no other function has been able to achieve. So I think we should be starting to not give us a lot, like we think of ourselves a lot in the process that are we going to be defunct? Are we going to do this? I think we are an important function. We have to move ahead and think of it like how we make an impact on business.
And in fact, to your point, the recent Cannes PR categories win have all been about great ideas. So you see Denso, you see VML, you see all the non-traditional PR, as we were discussing yesterday, also having a say in the idea. So it doesn't matter where the idea comes from. Do you see that in Singapore?
Yes, definitely. I don't think those lines are blurring. We're not, it doesn't matter if it's a creative agency, ad, PR. The idea, whichever sells best, is what works, and that agency leads everybody else around it. If it's PR or communications leading it, the media and others will follow. So that's clearly not a criteria anymore. It shouldn't be like the creatives coming with the ideas. And, to your point about, do we have a seat at the table? Yes, I think so. I think we've come way beyond, and I think COVID has kind of pushed us faster to that. And at least in Alcon where I work, we have corporate affairs. Everybody else reports into that, like, be it investor relations, CSR. So we are kind of it's a function that connects everybody. So we can connect the dots. We know what externally our brand is speaking or our competition is speaking. We understand what we want to say and what each of our functions want to say as well. So we can quickly connect the dots. And I think that's the smart thing about communication, because we are like master of all. And I think that's a good thing. It's not supposed to be like, I think we can do everything. So it's important that when you can connect the dots and, you lead the corporate strategy. And I think that's where future of PR is, or communication is, where we are able to drive the strategy in relations with the corporate team or the CEOs, because that's where our narrative is, and we can add most value to the business. Because we've realized ads can only do so much, but we know PR can go the extra mile. So that's where I see future-proofing is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you made a good point that, PR is everywhere. It's in CSR, it's in sustainability, it's leading employer branding initiatives. So PR is just not, the usual, what we used to do about 10, 20 years ago. It's actually, providing value in places where corporates are talking about today, trust, corporates are talking about purpose. So, and the talent and the consumer, actually our talent, consumer, investors are all looking for the same thing. And, PR has been driving these conversations, and hence it's best placed to kind of own it. But are we doing enough from a talent perspective, from a skill set perspective, from a capability perspective to, to get there and to own it? Or are we going to lose it?
I think we are in a generation where social media is everywhere. Everybody's creating content. Everybody knows the value of creating content. So I don't think the skill set is far off, but yes, you need to streamline that skill set, and where do you apply that, and where does the impact really, bring that content to, the real value. I think that's the miss that we haven't been able to establish. But I think as a generation where we are so digitally savvy, we are all selling stories, we are all know what works. I think skill set wise we are there, but I think we need to streamline that.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that PR is not taken as a science. Everybody has an opinion on PR, from the CEO to the CFO to across the organization. And then as you have these leaders from Elon Musk and others who become their own brand champions, I think that's a case study in itself, whether that's working or not working. Do you need a PR? So I don't think we are fighting within ourselves or at the seat at the table. We are fighting with people who are becoming brand ambassadors and are saying we don't need communications, we don't need marketing. But is that the right thing to do in the longer run? And what you are saying about trust and advocacy, that is something that is like what we are trying to build. And like you can have like a sustained period of time where I take Musk as an example because we have been, we are directly impacted by what he does. But it's like, there was a period when everybody was like, wow, this is this amazing beacon. And he's a visionary. But then again, like there is a moment where that doesn't happen. And he doesn't have a comms function. So I think there are those moments where the CEOs of companies feel that they know all about PR, they can they dictate what you have to do. I think when you get that seat at the table, you don't get it at the cost of trying to be the puppet of the CEO. So I think that is also an important thing to remember.
Yeah. You know, the talent part, I think it's so important, right? I think we all realize that, many of you run businesses and other things, is that we're in the midst of a talent war. It's a fact right now. One of the offshoots of the pandemic is that almost every sector is struggling for talent, right? In our sector, in IT, if you ask me what's the biggest challenge for the industry right now, it's not the market, it's not the demand environment, it's never been better. But actually it's attrition. We are seeing, as every company in this industry is seeing historic attrition rates, at about 20% or so is our attrition rate. We've never seen that before. So if you look at our sector on the PR side, on an ancillary thing, you mentioned Cannes Lions. So one of the very interesting sessions which were held there was by LinkedIn. Their CEO, Ryan, presented some data, incidentally, about the advertising industry, in which it showed that the advertising industry over the last 5 years had lost about 17% of their creative talent. And even today, 30 to 40% of people are thinking of exiting that industry, right? I think that's something we worried about. There wasn't data for the PR one. If there's someone from LinkedIn in the room, it'll be great service to this community to maybe do it for this industry, but I suspect it'll be similar. PR is a hard profession. It's not easy, right? It's, you're constantly on, you know, even as a panel, as we were preparing and getting to know each other last night, two of us had some crisis comms and they had to call their CEOs and bosses. It's hard to be in communications, even hard to be in agency. You're always on, you're traveling, your schedules are tough, you have demanding clients, budgets are a challenge. It's not an easy profession. And as a consequence of the pandemic, people are also making different life choices. In my team, also, we are facing some issues related to it. I lost my Asia Pacific CMO, because he decided to retire early and see the world. So he was sharing, Sean, he was sharing his itinerary of what he's going to do over the next year, which is scuba diving in the Seychelles, motorcycle riding across South America, and all of us were very envious. But, you know, we lost someone who had worked with us for 12 years to a life choice. Similarly, some of our junior people we're losing to extremely high salaries. There's a person we hired in London in our content team who was doing really well with us. Just 1 year experience, doing extremely well, got offered a 4x jump on the salary. So he was earning more than 2 levels above him now. And that's very hard to retain people. But I think that's something we need to really think about in our profession, and to keep people engaged, to keep people, their career paths, offer them, and also inspire them to work in this profession. One of the things, and we can, you know, talk about it in this panel, is that the PR industry does have a PR problem, right? If you look at it, you were talking about the fact inside companies, we're always explaining. There's this old political axiom from the 1980s, I think Ronald Reagan is, it's often attributed to Ronald Reagan, which says that when you're explaining, you're losing. But as a profession, we're still, although we've got the seats on the table and all of that, but we're still often explaining what's the value we bring to the table. I still see those conversations. Finance doesn't do that. Sales doesn't do that. HR doesn't need to do that. But communications is still, to some degree, doing that. And even externally in the market, there is a reputation challenge. Gallup, which has been tracking reputation across sectors in the US for the last 20 years, rates the net positive sentiment towards reputation for the PR sector at -2. It's plus 34 in the US. It's plus 34 for the technology side. It's plus 14 for banking. It's -20 for the oil and gas sector, but the PR sector is down in the negative side. So we're in a business in which we help advise people on how to manage their reputations. But as an industry, we haven't managed our reputation outside very well. People see this industry as often with a negative slant. They're spin doctors, they turn the story, this thing and all that. So I think the need for a stronger positive narrative is there, and the opportunity is certainly there with many of the things we're talking about, right? Climate, inclusion, all of these things are on the corporate agenda. And there's a big, big opportunity for communicators and for agencies to play a role in shaping the future of companies.
So we'll come to PR for PR, because that's been a point of concern for a long time. But if we stay on the talent point, from a skill sets point, with everything merging, Lavanya, like we were saying, it's where the idea comes from, like Bodhi mentioned. are functions amalgamating into one large function, and is our talent ready?
One thing I have to say is future-proofing PR is future-proofing ourselves from ourselves, perhaps. There's one thing that keeps me awake. I think everybody asks CEOs the question, what keeps you awake in the night? But if you ask a communications head today, it's talent that keeps you awake. I agree to all the points that are made, but I think the scenario is so different across the world when it comes to communications talent. And I'm sitting in this room chatting with some people and seeing what is happening. India may be far ahead when you look at the eastern part of the world, where my debate today in Japan is, can we find somebody who has remotely a word called communications on their CV to be able to hire them? Because there is no pipeline. Because no university in Japan gives a certificate in communications. I go to Southeast Asia, the case is the same. Vietnam, and she can agree with me, maybe Singapore is one very unique place in Southeast Asia, but when I dealt with Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangkok, no talent in communications, right? One of the biggest challenges, I think, for us is it's not about what is the job description of communications today, because you said that. We are in a borderless world where borders are more pronounced. We are working in a diverse environment where differences have become even more clear. So we are in a contradictory world today, which means the merging lines between functions is very clear. So yesterday we were talking about what's future, and when you talk about, we are talking about multiverses, megaverses, we're talking virtual and real. I think we're doing more on the virtual than real today, but when you look at the talent, we still talk about media relations. We're talking about waking up in the morning and calling those editors once again, issuing a press release. So, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, because that's the necessity of the day. Because depending on which part of the world you are in, your channels are different. So the talent is very different. So if you sit in a global position, I have a headquarters where I sit is in Japan, but the whole world is something that we need to look at. But then how do we handle talent? We are bringing talent from outside into Japan, but integrating that talent is a challenge. It's not about diversity, because diversity is there. It's about inclusivity. That's a challenge today. I'm a brown woman who sits in a Japanese company on an executive role. When I look around and I don't see any other faces around me. But the emotional value I bring to the table is different. Same is the case with whether it's a Southeast Asian sitting on the table or a European sitting on the table. There are all the emotional elements that are coming to it. So I think we need to really build a pipeline, and I think Sahana said it, COVID is giving us an opportunity where virtual is becoming more easier to operate. But the taxes in countries don't really allow you to put positions outside of where you are legally based. But if we can erase those rules to really create a network around, maybe there is a way we can handle the talent.
Bodhi, you want to react to that?
See, I'm working in America where I can't say diversity is not a problem. So I think the talent thing is not only PR or communications, it's across. But I think it is, what you said is right, because you don't get the right talent, because you don't have the right schools or like the education. When I moved to Asia for the first time, and we were based out of China, like there were people telling me that, oh, we do it all differently. So Vietnam will say, my language and my media relations is different. Australia was the one who used to be the people is like, you are coming from a developing point of view, we are far developed, so don't tell us what to do. But eventually, what we realized, and again, it coming back to the story, if you have a strong story, if it's a story about safety, it's a story about diversity, it's a story about, it's the emotion, and it's all the same across the world, even in the US, even in Europe, even in Asia. And I think That is difficult for a talent to understand because they're not getting the right coaching, because you are in a local mindset all the time. You are being told, like, focus on that proper media that you're looking at, and which is not a bad thing, because local grassroots media relations is very important, and it is important for that function to thrive. But I don't see the coaching coming, and like I think what Amit is doing with SCORE and like teaching here, it's a great first step towards that goal, because we are very much into that local kind of a mindset. Like, think about that salary that you're getting and how you move to the next 10 grand more, and rather than thinking, okay, if you want to move to that step of like if you want to get into a global career, and I'm sure all of us have had that dream somewhere, that's why we are today talking about how it is achieved, but then you have to try for that. You have to have really great coaching and mentoring, which I was lucky to get early on in my career. So not everybody is fortunate enough to get it. But like I said, PR is not a science, but like if we don't think of it to making it a science or like some process to build it, I can still not explain to my dad what I do, and he still tells everyone that he works at marketing, and it's a journey, and I think it's another few decades I'll be able to explain, but so far I'm still in HR marketing somewhere in his mind. So that journey is important.
So, what would you tell people sitting here if they'd have to make a career in public relations globally? What do they need to do? Abhinav?
Yeah, I think by nature our world is more and more global, right? And if you are in the PR industry in India, already I think your importance in the global context is rising, right? India as an economy and India as a player geopolitically is increasingly getting more and more important in a world which is very complex, and in a world which is also rife with a lot of risk. In the latest World Economic Forum risk report, only 16% of respondents expressed optimism on what the future is going to look like. 84% were worried or extremely pessimistic about it. There are many, many issues which we face. Of the top 10 risks, 5 relate to climate, 3 relate to societal issues, 2 relate to the economy, right? And on that context, I think increasingly companies across the world are trying to strengthen their capability to deal with a very difficult environment. The communication function side is evolving. As we discussed, your client, the chief communications officer, has a seat on the table, and are being asked to do a lot more. Like some of the points which you were raising, Lavanya and Bodhi and Sahana, is that the function is being asked to evolve into different areas. Just to give one example, the biggest pivot most companies are making in the next 10 years is going to be on the climate and sustainability side. And what I'm seeing as the trend in Europe is a lot of chief communication officers are also being given responsibility for sustainability or for climate action. Now, when they look at a new remit, immediately that's not an area which they have experience in, and they need a partner who can help them create that narrative. Now, how many agencies are prepared to deal with that, right? And if you don't have that capability, they'll go to someone else. But if you can build that capability, there are tremendous opportunities globally. Talent from India is increasingly recognized globally. I mean, there's a lot of hurrah about, at least in the tech sector, about Indians operating at the top of the food chain as CEOs and other things. But I think one advantage that Indian talent has is it's used to working in situations which require resilience. It's used to working in naturally diverse environments. It's used to, we are used to working with different stakeholders, being accommodative, being persuasive. All of these skills are very relevant in the global PR industry. Now, what do you need to do to break in? You need to be given an opportunity. Often that opportunity, and if I look at many of our careers, has come in because we work with global companies, and given the work which we did maybe in India or in another place, we were given an opportunity to say, okay, why don't you go and run that? Like early in my career, I was asked a question. I was based out of Bombay in our corporate headquarters, and we invested into Latin America. And one of the challenges our business faced there was nobody had heard of the Tata Group, TCS, even knew very little about India. And the question which was asked of me was, would you like to go and create our brand in this market? And I had both my hands up saying, wow, what a challenge to take up. And that was probably the best 4 years of my career, even today, as I talk about it. So you need to be given an opportunity by your organization, of course. But mentorship, you mentioned, that's really important. It's good to find mentors who are willing to create opportunities for you, advise you, and take you forward. But also be flexible. I think often when you raise your hand to do something, it's not what comes immediately on the plate, but how you can shape it, right? So you may be given an opportunity today, but if you can shape it, you can expand your careers into doing something bigger with it. And in the communication side, the world's your oyster. As I said, climate is the thing. CEO communications needs to be more strategic than ever. CEO is under more pressure than ever from every kind of constituency. I believe there is even a case for creating a new function called activist relations, given activist investors, activist employees, and all the pressures which companies are facing today. So there's just so much opportunity. I think if you can build yourself, also your personal brand is important, right? I'm surprised at how many communicators are not active externally. They haven't, many people have not even put their photos on their social media handles, are not active. You know, you've got to use all these channels which are available to you to demonstrate your expertise. And often people get discouraged because you tweet something or you put a post on LinkedIn and it gets 5 likes, right? And it's like, oh, there's no point to this, nobody's watching it. The interesting thing is, you may get 5 likes, but there are 2,000 or 3,000 other people who've seen your post, not responded to it, not engaged with it, but noted it down. And in their mind, you're getting, they're like, okay, that topic this person knows something about. So I think the more active you are, the more you show your expertise externally, the more opportunities also will come your way. And there are a lot of spaces where people need expertise, like I said, climate. Even on the media side, Bloomberg had done this analysis, that the number of articles being done on global media on climate have increased by 1,490% since 2018. No surprise to any of us. So if you can develop yourself in a specific niche, you will create a lot of opportunities for yourself.
So you're saying PR for self and PR for PR.
Yeah.
Sahana, what do you have to say for that? Do we do enough of PR for PR? I mean, are we talking in the same language that the board understands? Are we providing value?
So I like what Lavanya said, what value we bring. I think we need to value PR first, and we need to be valued. I think there are 2 parts to it. One is we don't need to undermine, or we don't need to dumb it down for people. I think there's a certain level of education around the table, so I don't think we need to dumb it down to people. I think that's one thing. Second is we need to be in places that is valued. PR is valued, or communications is valued, because otherwise you're spending half the time convincing people what you're going to do or what value you will bring, instead of really channelizing your energy into places that really makes a difference or move the needle for the business or the company. So I think, be valued and value your profession. I think that's my take on, if you want to say PR for PR. It starts from us, and I think we need to up that game individually and across at the same time.
That's a great point, but how do we do that? We don't have one language we don't have one measurement tool. So what is the language that people are understanding, and what is the language in which we are communicating? And we are communicators.
I think many times I say this, we need to just go back to the basics. Basically, when you sit at the table, you're asking the same question that we have ever asked, is why? So whether we are doing messaging, whether we are doing crisis, whether we are doing our own career development, the eternal question about why comes to the table, and the why answers a lot of things. Sahana just said, I think we mentioned the word purpose, and communication normally takes the lead in defining the purpose for the company, or at least leading the purpose communication for the company. But we are always debating about me versus HR, me versus marketing, me versus this. So we go into a defensive when we think about ours. But I guess we do have a clear purpose, don't we? And if we know what is our purpose, it's very easy to be able to translate that into the value you bring to the table. And I was yesterday mentioning this, I guess it's a joke, but it's true, that when the crisis hits, the value of communication is clearly laid out on the table. And I can personally say that because the past 3 years of my life has been spent in changing the narrative for a company which has seen the worst executive misconduct ever in the world, right? And we had somebody who's a very glamorous person falling right from the top to the bottom. But then it never went away. We have stories always coming with them escaping in a music box to every legal brings out the same story because people don't let it go. But it took us a lot of time to show what the narrative is changing. And there, though data helps a lot of time, we didn't have to show data to prove value because clearly the narrative that is being written is changing from being biased to giving more objective picture to actually giving credit to the company coming out of the shackles. So that shows the value that we bring to the table. Again, coming back to measurement, by the way, I'm all for measurement and I'm all for data. It's very important. But it's about how we use it. Because most of the time, the presentations on measurement after every event look the same. It's the same data being presented to show what is the impact we have created. But we never ask the question, when we are moving today towards precision communications, and we are targeting audience, we are being very specific to the stakeholder we are talking to. Why do we come up with a generic measurement to show the impact? Why not show the impact on a specific stakeholder? So this is where we need to start asking the question about how are we measuring? Are we measuring what we are doing? Or are we measuring to really tell people what we are doing?
Could I add a quick point
Please.
to that? I really like what you said, Lavanya. I think it's important to know your own purpose, be confident about it, communicate it. On that point on measurement, I do feel we are missing one piece in the puzzle, right? When you look at the comparison with the other departments, HR, finance, sales, and you pick the annual report of any company, what's in the annual report? There are a lot of measurements or indicators around performances of those areas. So, you know, on the finance side, it's the revenue of the company, it's EBITDA, it's profitability performance. On sales, a lot of companies are reporting their pipeline, big deals closed and things like that. HR side, attrition of course has been reported today. A lot of reporting around diversity, inclusion, and your talent density and your talent quality. What's in the annual report from communications? The communication team builds the whole annual report, but we haven't put ourselves inside that. Now, I'll give a very quick example on how we sort of address that gap on the marketing side. Because about 11 years ago, we engaged with a company in the UK called Brand Finance to calculate something which is called brand value. Some of you may be familiar with. Brand value is a simple measure, but it's complex to do because it involves a lot of deep financial analysis. What it does is it isolates what part of your enterprise value is directly attributable to your brand. And I remember the time we did this assessment with them, and then we got an opportunity to present it to our board. And the first time we went and showed it, presented it, and it's thorough methodology. It's vetted, it's audited, all of those things. When they saw it, the penny sort of dropped for many of the board members. I remember a conversation with one of our board members in which he said, "Oh, this is great." He said, "All these years, you know, we've been putting this money in the brand and marketing, and I always thought it went into a black hole. But it didn't. Actually, it's gone inside our market cap and our enterprise value. It's just that we were not able to isolate it in the past, right?" Today, in our annual report, that brand value thing is carried in every annual report. And I think there are many measures on the comm side, but I think we do need to get to that holy grail, which can be published on this. That will help address some of the things.
I completely agree on that aspect, and I'll just take a minute on this. One of the things, and this is very interesting because I was in the board presentations recently when we were coming up with our 10-year plan. And you know, with automotive industry, with the climate change thing and the carbon neutrality goals, every part of our industry is impacted, right? So we continuously are being asked to present to the board today to show how we're going to really position ourselves in the changing world. So one of the things that comes up, and yesterday I mentioned, is trust. And arguably today, trust is really getting into the KPIs of the C-suite and executive committee. And I come from a Japanese company, it's an automotive company, and I've seen the changes in the past 1 decade on the list of KPIs that the company used to have, from market shares to operating profits to revenue figures to today. We're talking about trust and brand value and culture and employee engagement as part of the list of scores that an executive committee is responsible for. So I feel that there is a change, but communication still needs to find that thread to show, because we are impacting all the things that I said. But how do we show that we are impacting is going to be a big challenge.
So on this point, would you have the top things that you'd like to leave the audience with? That what do we need to do to future-proof PR?
I think what I mentioned itself, owning the corporate narrative, because we are one function that slits across. And I think that's where we need to head towards. I know we're all working in silos, or we are a small, lean team trying to do internal communication or doing bits of CSR, but I think this group or this team needs to grow and start owning that space completely, because I think, and that's the structure that I see going forward, and we're no longer just like a small function which is part of HR or whatever you were previously seen, but just owning the whole corporate narrative and the corporate strategy going forward for the company. And I see that's where we are going to head, and we need to build those skill sets as we move along into our next generation, make sure that they are nurtured in a way that they stick around. And I think when I was doing PR or studying a few years ago, I think one thing my professor said is the first 3 years is the most challenging, because you're clueless, you don't know what you're doing, PR is not really clearly defined for anybody. And I think that's those 3 years of, you need that hand-holding. And I know Bodhi and I were in part of some trainings that we got nurtured through, and we helped. And we've had so many moments where you want to throw things out and walk out. But I think that's the most crucial part, that you need to nurture those talents so they can continue and they can look beyond that moment and see a profession that is for everybody over here. So I think that would be my 2 cents on talent, as well as where we want to head towards as a communication community.
Abhinav, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, as I said earlier as well, I think talent and agility in your business is very important. I'll add one more point. I think if you had to do one thing to future-proof your business and you could do only one thing, then I'd encourage you to become Marcos. Let me explain that. So, as I said many years ago, when I became the first CMO for Latin America at TCS, we had entered into the Brazilian market, and we started a joint venture with the company. And one of the things we had to do was build our narrative and our brand in that market. So we hired a PR agency there. It was a small Brazilian company called Singular Communications, and they appointed a person to us. His name was Marcos, and this was the first account he was leading in his career, very excited about it. And when he came into us, he said, I have one request to make of you. And I said, what do you need? He said, it's unusual. I don't know if you'll agree to it or if my own company will agree to it, but I want to do this, and I think it's going to really help. So I said, what do you need? And what Marcos said was, I want a desk in your office, so that in every week, at least 2 or 3 days, I can sit out of your office, because by doing so, I'll be considered part of the team, and I'll know what's going on, and I'll be able to serve you better. Very few people have asked us of this. Many agencies we work with globally, and we agreed to this. And Marcos went on for the next 7 years to work with us, spending half his career inside our office, half back in their company. But what happened to him was, since he was there in the office, he knew everything which was going on. And he made connections across all levels in the team in Brazil, not just the communication department, but the sales department. He knew what deal was going to take place. He knew what the finance team was worried about. And as a consequence, he knew both everything which is going on, but he could bring in the external view from the agency capabilities. And he became untouchable, because he actually knew our business better than some of the people on our team. So for 7 years, this guy went on to serve us till he moved to a new opportunity elsewhere. But that made that agency entrenched into our business, because by a very simple act, when you look at it, all they did was stay close to your customer and be invested in the evolution of your customer. The CCO roles are evolving. if you can be part of that evolution, you future-proofed your business.
I
That's
think
what I'd say.
that's really relatable because I also had a similar opportunity where I was from the agency world and I sat in Capgemini's office and I saw them grow from 250 people to 250,000 plus people. And I don't think I would have got that insight or the understanding or would have, if I hadn't seen that growth happening. Like every week when I would go to their office for 3 days a week, my desk would have moved 2 buildings away, and if you don't see that, you don't experience it, then how are you going to communicate it? So I think that's an important point. Lavanya, over to you.
Agree to all the points both of you have made. I have this 4R, which I say is very critical, whether it's for future-proofing or whether it's for today. Resilience, very, very critical for communications. Responsible, because you're responsible for giving the right advice, but you're also responsible for the company saying the right things too. Being real, authentic is very, very critical. Many times, we are influenced by business, by people, by our executives to say things. But we have got to be very careful because when we know that the future, it'll be seen through. It'll be seen through by our stakeholders. So staying real. And the last R is the most important one, which I said at the beginning is staying relevant. Because there's nothing that relevance will make you agile, relevance will give you the ability to adopt. I always say that we don't have control on many things, and Bodhi said this, we don't know if the executive is going to believe in us, they will support us. COVID showed us an unprecedented existential crisis. Ripple effects we are seeing, supply chain is going haywire, geopolitical issues, keeping us we don't have a control on these things, but what we have control on is the ability to balance ourselves. It's like riding a wave. You can't control the waves, but you can control yourself to ride the wave. And I suppose this is very important for us. So these 4 R's is something that I feel is very critical for us as we move forward.
Bodhi.
I will use those 4 hours to prepare my son to get to school next time. I need that every morning. So I think what you all have said is all correct. I think the talent bit, what you said, raising the hand, when I was during Diwali time frame when I got a call when I first moved to China and I was driving and my boss and CEO said like, China Jana? I was like, Jana. So it was like, where in China, do you know? Like we are like one of the biggest traits as Indians is like we are always ready to take that challenge. I had a neighbor in Michigan whom I once asked like, so you travel the world? Because he has a boat, he has 3 cottages, and he's like, no, I go up north every season, every summer. That's why do I need to go out? So I think that is the difference of like we should have that in our heart and minds always, that what we bring to the table nobody else can. We have that aptitude, we have that eagerness, we are always ready to go and rule the world and conquer the world, because we have been taught since day one like fight karo. Like just get it, like you have to be the best. Like, and I say that like my wife is becoming a tiger mom like with my kids, which worries me, but like that is how we as Indian parents are, right? So I think that's a thing that we like, that's my advice to everyone, like continue doing that. But for the younger people in the room or otherwise, it's just stick at your job. Like you won't get like gold, silver and everything within 1 year of working. I think the resilience of being at your organization, like Abhinav and like everybody else here, like we have spent a considerable amount of time in wherever we are. So I think that's an important point to be like, because I see the youngsters of today very anxious to move up the ladder very quickly, which I think doesn't happen if you do not stay in that organization for a longer period of time, whether global or local. If you have global aspirations, you need it more, because the visa is not coming from you just getting into your European trip. Never is. It always comes when you are here into the, you have worked and then you go it. Because it is hard for people to understand how difficult that whole process of getting into global thing as well. It takes work, it takes like it's practical. Like a visa is not given to somebody who has just come into that unless you're a student working there. So if you're working, you need to get there and then you move to that stage. And the third bit is like what Lavanya, you're mentioning, the metrics and everything. I have seen that myself, is that it's moving beyond like share of voice and everything. Like we need to think beyond our, like we have to show our share of voice. We have to get that packet of clips. Don't worry about that. What is a company? Your company has to be relevant. Like what you said, like I have been fortunate to work with Ford. It's a 118-year-old company and still, I would say, relevant to a lot of customers in the US. Again, I know I'm in India, so it has a different lens here, but like it is important to stay relevant. And if the business doesn't stay relevant, how does communication stay relevant at all? So I think that business objective and combining to go what you're doing and every one of us are doing is that one goal is that's not share of voice, that's not messaging, that's not tonality, that's like our customers finding you relevant still, which is, I think, the main thing that we are looking at. So that in a nutshell, which is, I would say.
Thank you everyone for these nuggets. I think what we've heard today is that PR is definitely poised to excel in the future. It's not just future-proofing PR, it's future-flourishing PR. What we need to do is we are already, we are already storytellers, we are the narrators, we are the brand custodians. We are well poised to take that a notch up by talking in the language the board understands, by upskilling ourselves and our ecosystem of agencies. We are the ones responsible for trust, sustainability, purpose, and all good things that the consumer and the other stakeholders are considering important today while choosing a brand. And I think the way to get there is to just invest in yourself, but most importantly, what the PR teams bring to the table is what the team said, resilience, the ability to go on, to manage a crisis, to be in it and not give up. So with that, I'll close this panel. Thank you so much for listening. You've been great.